My name is Clara Monroe, and for most of my adult life, I saw myself not as a whole person, but as a satellite in orbit around a brilliant, blazing sun. That sun was my husband, Julian. I'm an illustrator by trade, or at least I was. In the early days, before Julian, my world was a vibrant tapestry of ink-stained fingers, the scent of fresh paper, and the quiet satisfaction of bringing characters to life on a page. I had a small studio in the city's arts district, a place filled with light and the happy chaos of creation. Then I met Julian, and his gravity was immediate, immense. He was a whirlwind of ambition and charisma, working in international finance, a world so far removed from my own that it felt like another language. He loved my art, or so he said, but he loved the idea of it more than the reality. The reality was messy, uncertain, and didn't fit neatly into the polished, high-achieving life he was building for us. So, slowly, almost imperceptibly, I packed my art away. The freelance commissions dwindled, replaced by the full-time job of being Mrs. Monroe. We moved into a beautiful apartment in Port Blossom, a city that hugs the coastline, its air perpetually tinged with salt and the faint, sweet perfume of the botanical gardens it's famous for. Our home overlooked the harbor, a panorama of white sails and steel-gray water that changed with the light. It was a life of quiet elegance, of catered dinner parties and weekend trips to wine country. A life I convinced myself I wanted because it was the life Julian wanted for me. I became the steady anchor, the quiet harbor, just as he always said. Julian left for his trip on a Tuesday. "Just a week, Clara. Maybe 10 days, he'd said, kissing my forehead with an affection that felt practiced, perfected. Finalizing the logistics for the new Singapore fund. It's a big one." His words were always a little vague, shrouded in the jargon of his profession, and I had long ago stopped trying to parse them. He was the sun, I was the satellite. It was enough for me to know his general trajectory. He zipped his sleek leather suitcase, the sound unnaturally loud in the morning quiet. His presence was an energy field, a low hum of intensity that filled every room. When the front door clicked shut behind him, the silence that rushed in to fill the void was profound. It wasn't an empty silence, though. It was a space, a breath. The apartment, which always felt like a showroom when he was home, a testament to his success, suddenly felt like mine again. The air softened. The light seemed to filter in more gently, and I could hear the distant cry of gulls over the harbor. A sudden, unfamiliar impulse bloomed within me. It wasn't rebellion, not exactly. It was more like a quiet reclamation. For the week Julian was gone, I decided I would make this space truly my own. I would embark on a deep, cleansing spring clean, not just of surfaces, but of the stagnant energy that had settled in the corners of our home, and, perhaps, in the corners of my heart. Our home was, by all accounts, immaculate. Julian appreciated order, and I had become an expert curator of it. But there were forgotten spaces, the hidden territories of clutter that represented a life deferred. The hall closet was a crypt of old tennis rackets and ski boots from a single, disastrous trip to the mountains. The guest room drawers held linens that were never used. But the biggest challenge, the one I'd been avoiding for years, was the balcony. It was a generous space, with a stunning view, but it had become a repository for the things we couldn't quite commit to throwing away. Stacks of old design magazines, their pages curled and yellowed by the sun. Cardboard boxes filled with tangled fairy lights and brittle holiday ornaments. And, of course, there were the plants. Julian's plants. He had a surprisingly green thumb and took great pride in his small collection of architectural greenery. I spent the first day in a flurry of activity, purging the closets with a zeal that surprised me. Each bag I filled for donation felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. The second day, I washed every window until the harbor view was sharp and crystalline, letting the afternoon sun pour in, baptizing the rooms in golden light. By the third day, I was ready to face the balcony. The morning was glorious, one of those perfect spring days in Port Blossom where the sky is a high, cloudless blue and a gentle breeze carries the scent of blooming jasmine from the gardens below. I pulled on an old, paint-splattered smock, a relic from my studio days, and tied my long, dark hair into a messy knot. With a bucket of soapy water, a stack of soft rags, and a playlist of soulful folk music humming from a portable speaker, I stepped out into the sun. I worked with a steady, meditative rhythm. I sorted, I wiped, I discarded. The chaos slowly receded, revealing the beautiful slate tiles beneath. A sense of quiet accomplishment settled over me. Finally, all that was left was the corner dominated by Julian's plants. His prize was a magnificent fiddle-leaf fig, a towering specimen with huge, glossy, violin-shaped leaves. Julian doted on that plant. He misted its leaves, measured its water, and I'd even caught him once, murmuring to it as he wiped dust from its foliage. He called it the chairman. To me, it was just Julian's fig, another beautiful, high-maintenance object in his carefully curated world. I decided it needed to be moved. Dust and cobwebs had gathered in the corner behind its massive terracotta pot, and the tiles were stained with water rings. The pot was enormous, far heavier than I anticipated. I crouched, wrapping my arms around its rough, earthy circumference. I took a breath, braced my legs, and heaved. My hands, still slightly damp and soapy from the cleaning water, lost their purchase. For a horrifying, slow-motion second, the pot tilted, balanced precariously on its edge, and then it crashed to the ground. The sound was a sickening thud, followed by the sharp, splintering crack of terracotta shattering. Soil, dark and rich, spilled across the clean tiles like a wound. The fig tree lay on its side, its complex network of roots shockingly exposed, pale and vulnerable in the bright sunlight. "Oh no," I whispered, my heart sinking. Julian would be furious. Not just angry, but that quiet, disappointed fury that was so much worse. He'd see it as a metaphor for my carelessness, a failure to properly maintain the world he had built. I knelt in the dirt, the frustration pricking at the back of my eyes. I started to scoop the soil back into a pile, my fingers digging into the cool, damp earth. And that's when I felt it. Something hard and rectangular, wrapped in plastic. It didn't belong. It wasn't a rock or a piece of broken pot. My breath hitched. A tremor of unease, cold and sharp, skittered up my spine. Wiping away the soil, I unearthed a tightly sealed, vacuum-packed plastic bag. It was heavy, dense with purpose. With trembling hands, I pulled it from the dirt and the tangled roots. I sat back on my heels, the sun warm on my back, a stark contrast to the icy dread flooding my veins. I used a shard of the broken pot to slice open the plastic. My hands shook so badly I could barely control them. I tipped the contents onto the slate tiles and a soft gasp escaped my lips. It wasn't just one thing. It was a collection of secrets. Stacks of currency, euros and Swiss francs, bound in crisp, professional bank bands. There must have been over $100,000 worth, maybe more. There was a passport, a deep burgundy color I recognized as Swiss, with a man's name, Dominic Keller, and a photograph of a stranger. A man with sharp cheekbones and cold, assessing eyes. It wasn't Julian. And yet, there was something in the hard set of the jaw, a flicker of an expression, that felt unnervingly familiar. Beside the money and the passport lay a small, silver USB drive, its surface scratched. And finally, a thick manila folder, unmarked on the outside. My fingers felt numb as I opened it. Inside were pages and pages of complex legal documents, incorporation papers for shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Panama, detailed wire transfer records between numbered accounts, and shareholder agreements for a company named Apex Global Ventures. Julian's name was everywhere. A ghost in the machine, a signature on a dotted line, a beneficiary on an account. The numbers were staggering, amounts that made my head spin. This wasn't just a big fund. This was a different world entirely. A world of shadows and deceit. My knees gave out and I sank fully onto the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of the plant and the debris of my marriage. The life I had, the one I'd thought was so stable, so secure, was a lie. A meticulously constructed facade. Every late-night call Julian took in his study, every extended business trip, every vague answer, it all clicked into place, forming a picture of such profound betrayal that I felt physically ill. I thought of his words, "It's all under control, Clara. Just some complex market maneuvering. Nothing for you to worry your pretty head about." He hadn't been protecting me from complexity. He had been hiding his crimes from me. I wasn't his partner. I was his cover. The respectable, artistic wife who gave his life a veneer of normalcy. The satellite blissfully unaware of the dark side of her son. My hands were shaking, but a cold, clear thought cut through the panic. Evidence. Acting on an instinct I didn't know I possessed, I grabbed my phone from the pocket of my smock. With unsteady fingers, I began taking pictures. The scattered money, the open passport next to a shard of the pot, the documents laid out on the dirt-strewn tiles. I photographed everything, creating a digital record of the moment my life broke apart. Then, carefully, methodically, I placed every item back into the torn plastic bag. I nestled it deep within the spilled soil and broken terracotta shards, arranging the wreckage to look like a simple, unfortunate accident. To any casual observer, it was just a clumsy wife who had broken her husband's favorite plant. Sleep was an impossibility that night. I lay in our large, comfortable bed, the space beside me feeling like a cavernous void. The familiar silhouette of the furniture in the moonlight now seemed menacing. Every creak of the old building was the sound of my life collapsing. Betrayal was a physical ache in my chest. How could I have been so blind? For 6 years, I had loved a man who didn't exist. I had built my world on a foundation of lies. I replayed memories, now tainted by this new knowledge. The time he bought me a diamond bracelet, just because. The lavish vacations to places I'd only dreamed of. Had it all been funded by this? By deception? The shame was suffocating. I felt complicit, even in my ignorance. By dawn, the turbulent sea of my emotions had calmed, leaving behind a hard, cold shoreline of resolve. Fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. I needed help. I needed Sophia. Sophia Rossi had been my friend since my art school days. She was brilliant, fierce, and had a heart as big as her intellect. While I had drifted into the soft focus of domesticity, she had sharpened herself into one of the city's most respected family law attorneys. Her presence was a tonic of pragmatism and unwavering loyalty. I called her, my voice a raw whisper. "Sophia? Something's happened. Something terrible. Clara, what is it? Where are you?" Her voice, usually so sharp and professional, was soft with concern. "I'm at home." I broke Julian's fiddle-leaf fig. It sounded so absurd, so trivial. Sophia was silent for a beat. She knew me well enough to know there was more. "And what was inside the pot, Clara?" I met her at her downtown office, a place of calm wood tones and shelves filled with thick legal books. In the sanctuary of her private conference room, with a mug of hot, sweet tea warming my frozen hands, the story tumbled out of me in a torrent of broken sentences and quiet sobs. I told her everything: the crash, the bag, the money, the passport, the documents. Sophia listened, her expression unreadable but her focus absolute. She didn't interrupt. When I was finished, the room was silent save for the hum of the city traffic far below. She leaned forward, her gaze direct and compassionate. "Okay," she said, her voice calm and steady, a lifeline in my storm. "This is very serious, Clara. More serious than just Julian's infidelity to your marriage vows. This is criminal." "What do I do?" I whispered. "I don't know anything about this, I swear." "I believe you," she said, and the simple affirmation brought fresh tears to my eyes. "But the authorities might not be so quick to. You're his wife. You live in this home. They will assume you knew, or at the very least, that you benefited from it. You could be seen as an accomplice." The word accomplice landed like a punch to the gut. "No, I can't be." "Which is why we have to act first," Sophia continued, her lawyer mind already mapping out a strategy. "We go to the district attorney. We give them everything. You become the informant, the key witness. It's the only way to insulate yourself, to prove you're a victim in this, not a partner." The thought of walking into a police station, of voluntarily immolating my own life, was terrifying. But looking at Sophia's resolute face, I knew she was right. It was the only path forward. That afternoon, with Sophia by my side, I walked into the imposing granite building that housed the county's law enforcement offices. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a drum of fear. We were led to a small, sterile office to meet with a man named Detective Miller. He was older, with tired lines around his eyes, but a gaze that was surprisingly gentle. My voice trembled as I recounted the story for the second time that day, but I told it clearly, factually. I showed him the photos on my phone. He listened without expression, taking meticulous notes in a small black book. When I finished, he looked at me, then at Sophia. "You were right to come forward, Mrs. Monroe," he said, his tone professional but not unkind. "And you were smart to photograph everything before touching it further." He explained that they would need a warrant to search the apartment and retrieve the evidence. "It would be a great help to our case if you would consent to the search." My home, my sanctuary, was about to become a crime scene. I felt a wave of nausea, but I nodded. "Whatever you need." The next morning, Detective Miller arrived with a small team. They were quiet and respectful, but their presence felt like a profound violation. I watched numb as they cordoned off the balcony. They carefully documented and collected every shard of the broken pot, the soil, and the plastic bag with its damning contents. They sealed each item in evidence bags, their movements clinical and precise. The search of the apartment was just as thorough. They went through Julian's study, his closets, his files. It felt as if they were excavating my life, laying all its secrets bare. When they left, the apartment was unnervingly quiet again, but the silence was different now. It was the silence of an empty stage after the play has reached its tragic conclusion. I wandered from room to room, a ghost in my own home, touching the surfaces of a life that was no longer mine. A few days later, Detective Miller called. The forensic team had accessed the USB drive. "It's the motherlode, Mrs. Monroe," he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "This is an extensive money laundering operation. Apex Global Ventures is a front. Your husband and his associates have been washing millions for some very unsavory clients for years. We've had a file on him, but we never had the physical evidence to move forward. You just handed us the entire case." He told me they had issued a warrant for Julian's arrest. They would be waiting for him at the airport. My breath caught in my throat. This was real. This was happening. The man I had married, the man I had loved, was about to be arrested. "What about me?" I asked, my voice small. "For now, you continue to cooperate. You're our primary witness. We'll need you to give a formal, detailed statement. Your friend, Ms. Rossi, should be present." The call with Sophia that evening was stark. "File for divorce, Clara," she said, no room for ambiguity in her tone. "Immediately. And we file for a temporary restraining order to freeze all marital assets. We need to sever you from him completely, legally, and financially, before his sinking ship pulls you under with it." The word divorce was a final, brutal severance. The end of a dream, however flawed it had been. But I knew she was right. I was no longer a satellite. I had to find my own orbit, my own ground. Julian was arrested the moment he stepped off the plane from Singapore. According to the news report I watched with a sick feeling in my stomach, he had attempted to use the Dominic Keller passport at a secondary checkpoint. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. His face, flashed on the screen in a grainy airport security photo, was that of a stranger. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. I spent hours in sterile rooms with Detective Miller and prosecutors, answering endless questions about Julian's habits, his travels, his finances. I told them everything I knew, which I painfully realized was pathetically little about the things that truly mattered. My ignorance, once a source of shame, became my greatest defense. It was clear to everyone that I had been kept in the dark. Sophia was a warrior on my behalf. She filed the divorce papers and began the arduous process of untangling our finances. Julian, from jail, mounted a furious defense. His lawyers tried to claim that half of our assets, including the apartment, were his. They argued that his illicit income had paid for renovations and upkeep, thus entitling him to a share. It was a terrifying prospect, losing my home, the only solid ground I had left. But Sophia was prepared. She unearthed the original deed and my bank records, proving unequivocally that the down payment and a significant portion of the mortgage had been paid from an inheritance I received from my grandmother years before I even met Julian. She presented a meticulously documented financial history that showed my funds were separate and legitimate. In a small, quiet courtroom, a judge listened to Sophia's powerful argument. She spoke of financial manipulation, of my inheritance being co-opted to provide a respectable front for a criminal enterprise. The judge agreed. The court ruled that the apartment was my sole and separate property, untainted by Julian's crimes. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt the first real flicker of freedom. It wasn't just a home, it was a piece of my history, my identity, that I had successfully reclaimed. The trial was a media sensation, but I refused to attend. I didn't need to see him in person. The man I knew was already gone, replaced by the headlines and the cold, hard facts of his betrayal. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. I never heard from him directly again. In the quiet aftermath, I began the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding. It wasn't just about moving on, it was about moving inward. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman who helped me unpack the complex grief and guilt I carried. The guilt of not knowing, of not asking the right questions, of allowing myself to become so small. I enrolled in a community college program for paralegal studies. Sophia laughed when I told her. Finally coming over to the dark side, she joked. But it wasn't about becoming a lawyer. It was about empowerment. I wanted to understand contracts, to read financial statements, to never again be in a position where my life could be signed away without my knowledge. I reclaimed my old art studio. I swept out the dust, uncovered my canvases, and bought new sets of inks and paints. At first, my hands felt clumsy, my creative instincts dormant. But slowly, tentatively, I began to draw again. I filled sketchbooks with the faces of Port Blossom, with the shifting moods of the harbor, with the gnarled, beautiful branches of the trees in the gardens. The act of creating was an act of healing, of filling the hollow spaces inside me with color and light. My apartment transformed, too. I painted the walls a soft, warm white. I filled the rooms with art, my own and that of local artists I admired. The laughter of friends, whom I had reconnected with, echoed in the space that had once been so silent. It was no longer a showroom, it was a home, alive and breathing with my own spirit. One sunny afternoon, I went to a local nursery. I walked past the towering, dramatic fiddle leaf figs. Instead, I was drawn to a small, unassuming ficus ginseng. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, like a miniature, ancient tree, with a delicate spray of bright green leaves. It was resilient, interesting, and had a quiet strength. I bought it, along with a simple, unglazed clay pot that felt honest and earthy in my hands. I took it home and placed it not on the balcony, but on the windowsill in my bedroom, where it would catch the first rays of the morning sun. Sometimes, as I sit with my morning coffee, watching the light change over the water, my gaze falls on that little tree. It's a reminder. Not of the crash, or the betrayal, or the life that was shattered, but of the unexpected things you can find in the wreckage. It reminds me that sometimes, things have to break apart completely to reveal what's hidden inside. And that from that brokenness, if you are brave and patient enough, you can cultivate something new. Something stronger, more authentic, and entirely your own. My life is quieter now, less grand, but its roots are mine, and they are finally, firmly, planted in solid ground.